I, 28F, had spent my entire life dreaming about my wedding day. Not in the princess fantasy way, but in a quiet, hopeful way. I dreamed of the feeling of it. The feeling of standing with someone I loved, surrounded by people who loved us both, and making a promise that felt real and solid. I wasn't a fussy person. I didn't need a huge, extravagant affair. All I wanted was a day filled with genuine joy and a sense of peace. My husband, Mark, understood that completely. He was a simple, kind man, and the thing I loved most about him was his steady presence. He was my calm in a world that often felt chaotic. We planned the wedding together, every detail a shared decision. It was a small ceremony, followed by a reception at a beautiful old restaurant with a garden. It was perfect. It was us. The one part of the planning that was entirely mine was the dress. I didn't want anyone else's opinion clouding my own. I wanted to walk into a store and feel a connection to a piece of clothing that was meant to symbolize the start of my new life. I spent weeks looking. I went to a dozen shops, trying on dresses that were beautiful but didn't feel like me. They were too ornate, too plain, too heavy, too modern. I was starting to lose hope when I found it, tucked away in the corner of a little boutique I almost didn't go into. It was simple, elegant, and timeless. It had delicate lace sleeves and a flowing skirt that moved like water. When I put it on, I felt like myself, but a version of myself that was stepping into a brighter future. It was my dress. There was no doubt in my mind. I bought it that day and didn't show it to a single soul except my own mother. I wanted it to be a surprise, a special moment for Mark and for everyone else. The wedding ceremony was everything I had hoped for. The sun was shining, Mark's eyes were filled with tears when he saw me. And the promises we made felt like they were etched into the very air around us. I felt light, happy, and completely at peace. The weight of planning was gone, replaced by the pure, simple joy of being married to the man I loved. We walked out of the little chapel hand in hand, and I felt like I could float all the way to the reception. We arrived at the restaurant, and our friends and family cheered. The garden was beautiful, the tables were set perfectly, and the atmosphere was warm and celebratory. For the first hour, I was in a blissful bubble. Mark and I mingled, we laughed, we accepted congratulations, and I felt completely and utterly happy. I had a new husband, a new life, and a family that I was excited to officially be a part of. His family was complicated. His mother, Brenda, was a woman who liked to be in control. She was polite to me on the surface, but there was always a cool distance, a sense of evaluation in her eyes. His sister, Chloe, was a different story. She was bubbly and outgoing, but her compliments always felt like they had a hidden barb. She would say things like, "Oh, Lily, I love your hair like that. It's so brave of you to try something so different." I always brushed it off, telling myself I was being too sensitive. I wanted to have a good relationship with them for Mark's sake. I made an effort. I remembered their birthdays, I asked about their lives, I complimented their choices. I believed that with enough time and kindness, we could become a real family. About an hour into the reception, Chloe made her entrance. She was notoriously late for everything, so no one was surprised. But as she walked through the doors into the garden, a hush fell over the room. My smile froze on my face. My heart felt like it had dropped into my stomach. She was wearing my dress. Not a similar dress. Not a dress in the same style. It was the exact same one. The same delicate lace sleeves, the same flowing skirt, the same simple, elegant design. She glided towards us, a wide, triumphant smile on her face. She looked me up and down. A flicker of something sharp in her eyes before it was replaced by a look of feigned surprise. "Lily!" she exclaimed, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Oh my gosh, look at us. We're twins." She laughed, a light, tinkling sound that grated on my raw nerves. She leaned in and whispered, just for me and Mark to hear, "We have such good taste." I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, and I felt a hot flush of humiliation creep up my neck. This was my day, my moment, my dress. And she had stolen it, She had turned it into a joke. Mark, ever the peacekeeper, forced a laugh. "Wow, Chloe, what are the odds?" he said, trying to diffuse the tension. But I could see the confusion and hurt in his eyes, too. He knew this wasn't a coincidence. Chloe just shrugged, her smile never wavering. "I guess great minds think alike," she said, before turning to greet another guest, leaving me standing there feeling small and foolish. The bubble of my happiness had been popped with a single, cruel pinprick. The whispers started almost immediately. I could feel the eyes of our guests on me, on Chloe, then back on me. I saw the pity, the confusion, the amusement on their faces. My special day had been turned into a spectacle, and I was the main attraction in a circus I hadn't asked to join. I tried to hold my head high. I tried to pretend it didn't bother me. I smiled. I talked to people. I danced with my new husband. But the joy was gone, replaced by a cold, hard knot of anger and betrayal in my chest. Every time I saw Chloe twirling around the dance floor, her dress a mirror of my own, it felt like a fresh slap in the face. She was lapping up the attention, telling everyone the story of the crazy coincidence. She was the star of the show, and I was just the backdrop. I thought that was the worst it could get. I thought the universe had delivered its cruelest joke for the day. I was wrong. About 30 minutes later, Brenda, my new mother-in-law, made her own grand entrance. She had been at the ceremony but had disappeared right after, claiming she needed to help the restaurant staff with a seating chart issue. Now, she walked into the garden, beaming, ready to receive the attention she clearly felt she deserved. And then I saw it. My blood ran cold. She was wearing the dress, too. The exact same dress, the lace sleeves, the flowing skirt, the simple, elegant design. 3 of us. Standing in the same room at my wedding reception, wearing the same bridal-adjacent white dress. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a funny prank. It was a statement. It was a coordinated attack. Chloe rushed over to her mother and they hugged, both of them laughing. They posed for a picture together, 2 identical bookends of cruelty. Brenda caught my eye from across the room. She didn't offer a shocked explanation or an apology. She just gave me a small, tight smile. A smile that said, "Welcome to the family. This is your place now." In that moment, I knew that my dream of a peaceful, happy family was just that. A dream. And I had just woken up to a nightmare. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. I felt Mark's hand tighten on mine. He was speechless, his face a mask of disbelief. He looked from his mother to his sister, then to me, and the color drained from his face. He finally understood. This was not some bizarre accident. This was deliberate. This was a message, delivered on the day that was supposed to be the happiest of my life. They had declared war, and I was the unsuspecting target. The party continued around us, but for me, it was over. The music sounded distant, the laughter felt hollow, and the beautiful garden felt like a cage. All I could see were those 2 dresses, mocking me, erasing me, turning my special day into their personal stage for a power play I didn't even know I was a part of. I needed to get away. I mumbled something to Mark about needing some air and slipped out of the main garden area, finding a small, secluded bench behind a row of hedges. The happy music was muffled here. I could finally breathe, but each breath was shaky. Tears I had been holding back started to well up in my eyes. It was so much more than just a dress. It was the calculated cruelty of it. They had seen my happiness, my special moment, and they had decided to crush it, to publicly humiliate me in front of everyone I cared about. The thought that they had planned this, that they had sat together and conspired to hurt me, was a physical pain. It felt like a stone in my chest. Mark found me a few minutes later. He sat down beside me, not saying anything at first, just putting his arm around me. His presence was a small comfort, but it couldn't erase the image of his mother and sister, smiling and triumphant in their matching dresses. "I am so sorry, Lily," he finally whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I don't know what to say. I don't understand why they would do this. You don't? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the genuine confusion on his face. He truly didn't get it. He had grown up in this dynamic, this strange world of passive aggression and hidden meanings. To him, his mother and sister were just being difficult or dramatic. He didn't see the malice. No, I don't, he said, shaking his head. It's insane. It's like a bad joke. Maybe they thought it was funny? A prank that went too far? A prank. The word felt like a tiny dagger. A prank is putting a whoopee cushion on a chair. A prank is not a meticulously planned psychological attack designed to make a new bride feel worthless on her wedding day. Mark, I said, my voice gaining a little strength. This was not a prank. They did this to hurt me. They did this to show me that I don't matter. That this day, our day, is still all about them. He looked wounded by my words, as if I were attacking him. They wouldn't do that, he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. They love you. They were so excited for us. Were they? I thought back over the past year. The backhanded compliments from Chloe, the subtle ways Brenda would undermine my decisions about the wedding. The constant little reminders that I was an outsider, a guest in their family. I had ignored it all. I had made excuses for them. I had told myself I was being paranoid. But now, seeing it all laid out so clearly, I realized I hadn't been paranoid at all. I had been naive. We have to go back in there, he said gently, trying to pull me up. We can't let them ruin this. But they already had. The magic was gone. The joy had been siphoned out of the day, leaving behind a bitter residue. I stood up, not because I wanted to, but because I knew he was right. Running away would only give them more power. I had to face them. I had to walk back into that garden with my head held high, even if it was the hardest thing I had ever had to do. I took a deep breath, wiped the tears from my eyes, and smoothed down the skirt of my now tainted dress. Okay, I said, my voice flat. Let's go. Walking back into the reception was like stepping onto a stage. Every eye was on us. I could feel the pity and the morbid curiosity. I pasted a smile on my face, a brittle thing that I was sure looked as fake as it felt. I went to the bar to get a glass of water, needing something to do with my hands. Chloe found me there, her expression a perfect blend of concern and smug satisfaction. Are you okay, Lily? She asked, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. You disappeared. I was worried about you. I am standing here, my heart in pieces, and she is asking if I am okay. I'm fine, Chloe, I say, my voice colder than I intend. Good, she chirped, completely missing or ignoring my tone. I was just saying to Mom, it's actually kind of funny when you think about it. We'll have such a story to tell. The trio of brides. She laughed again, that same grating, tinkling sound. A story to tell. My wedding day, reduced to an amusing anecdote for her to trot out at parties. The anger that had been simmering in my chest began to boil. I don't think it's funny, I said, looking her directly in the eye. I think it's cruel. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A flash of genuine anger crossed her face before she masked it again. Oh, Lily, don't be so sensitive, she said, patting my arm condescendingly. It's just a dress. You shouldn't let a little thing like this ruin your big day. It's just a dress. That was the line. The dismissal, the gaslighting. She was telling me my feelings were invalid, that I was overreacting. I felt a sudden, surprising clarity. I was done making excuses for her. I was done trying to be the bigger person. It's not just a dress, Chloe, I said, my voice low and steady. And you know it. I turned and walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing at the bar with a flicker of uncertainty on her face. It was a small victory, but it was something. I found Mark, who was now in a tense conversation with his mother. I just don't understand the thought process, Mom, he was saying, his voice tight with frustration. Oh, for heaven's sake, Mark, stop being so dramatic, Brenda replied, waving her hand dismissively. It's a beautiful dress. I saw it in a magazine and loved it. Chloe saw it separately and loved it too. It's a popular design. Lily doesn't own the copyright on it. She looked over at me as I approached, her eyes hard. Honestly, dear, she said, addressing me directly, you should take it as a compliment that we all have such sophisticated taste. A compliment. She was twisting it, reframing their cruelty as a form of flattery. It was breathtaking in its audacity. This was their strategy. Deny, dismiss, and reframe. Make me the unreasonable one. Make me the sensitive, dramatic party pooper who couldn't take a joke. I looked at Mark, and I could see him starting to waver under his mother's confident assault. He was conditioned to believe her, to smooth things over, to accept her version of reality. I knew then that I couldn't rely on him to fight this battle for me. He was caught in the middle, torn between his wife and his family. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to reclaim any piece of my dignity, I would have to do it myself. The rest of the reception passed in a painful blur. We cut the cake, we had our first dance, we went through the motions. But every smile was forced, every laugh was hollow. I was acutely aware of Brenda and Chloe, moving through the crowd, holding court, their identical dresses like a uniform of a private army. They were a unit, and I was the enemy. When it was finally time to leave, I felt a wave of relief so profound it almost made me weak. As we said our goodbyes, Brenda pulled me into a stiff, papery hug. I do hope you had a wonderful day, dear, she whispered in my ear, her voice laced with insincerity. Despite the little wardrobe malfunction, I pulled back and looked her in the eye. It wasn't a malfunction, Brenda, I said, my voice quiet but firm. It was a choice, and I won't forget it. I saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, a brief chink in her armor. She wasn't used to being challenged. But then it was gone, replaced by her usual condescending smile. You'll feel better after a good night's sleep, she said, patting my cheek. As Mark and I drove away, the silence in the car was heavy. The joy and excitement that should have filled that car ride were gone, replaced by a cold, heavy sense of dread. Our new life together had started not with a celebration, but with a declaration of war. And as I looked out the window at the city lights blurring past, I made a silent promise to myself. They had started this fight, but I was going to finish it. I didn't know how yet, but I knew one thing for sure. They were not going to get away with it. The hurt was already beginning to harden into resolve. This wasn't just about a dress anymore. This was about respect. And I was going to get it. The next morning, I woke up with a headache and a heart full of lead. The beautiful memories of my wedding ceremony were overshadowed by the ugly stain of the reception. Mark was still asleep beside me, his face troubled even in slumber. I slipped out of bed and went to the living room of our hotel suite. The first thing I saw was my dress, hung carefully on the back of a door. It looked beautiful and innocent, but all I could see were the three of them. A grotesque trio. The anger from the night before had cooled into something colder and sharper. A need for answers, not their flimsy excuses, but the real, undeniable truth. I knew I wouldn't get it from them directly. They had their story, and they were sticking to it. I needed proof. Something concrete that would shatter their facade of innocence. Later that day, after we had checked out and driven back to our new apartment, the task of unpacking gifts began. It should have been a happy chore, a chance to see the love and support from our friends and family materialized in toasters and towels. But the mood was somber. Mark was quiet, clearly wrestling with his loyalty to me and his ingrained habit of defending his mother and sister. Maybe they really didn't know, he said at one point, his voice hopeful. Maybe it was the world's biggest, craziest coincidence. I stopped unwrapping a set of wine glasses and looked at him. Do you really believe that, Mark? I asked softly. Your mother and your sister, who talk on the phone 5 times a day, who go shopping together every weekend, independently bought the exact same. very distinct dress, and both decided to wear it to our wedding, arriving at different times to maximize the drama. Does that sound plausible to you? He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. When you put it like that, no. But the alternative is that they are monsters, that they intentionally tried to ruin our wedding, and I just can't wrap my head around that. You don't have to, I said, but I do. I needed to understand the why. Was it just a mean-spirited prank? Or was it something deeper? The breakthrough came from an unlikely place. Mark was setting up his new home office, and he pulled out his old laptop. I should probably transfer all the family photos off this thing before I wipe it, he said, more to himself than to me. He mentioned that his family used a shared photo-sharing website, a private one where they all uploaded pictures from holidays and birthdays. He logged in to start downloading the albums. A thought sparked in my mind. A long shot, but worth a try. Is there a messaging feature on that site? I asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, I think so, he said, distracted by the download progress. Mom likes it because it's not mainstream. Why? No reason, I said. Just curious. Later that evening, when Mark was in the shower, I went over to the laptop. It was still logged in. My heart was pounding. I felt like a spy, and I hated it. But I hated the feeling of being gaslit and humiliated even more. I navigated to the messaging section, and there it was. A conversation thread between Brenda M. and Chloe Darling. The title of the thread was Project Whiteout. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on it. The conversation went back 3 months. 3 months. They had been planning this for a quarter of a year. I scrolled up to the beginning, my hands shaking. The first message was from Chloe to Brenda. It contained a link to the dress. My dress. The message read, "Found it. This is perfect. Simple enough to be plausible, but white enough to make a statement." Brenda's reply came a few minutes later. "Oh, darling, you are brilliant. It's perfect. She will look absolutely foolish. Order 2 in our sizes immediately." I scrolled through the messages, each one a fresh wave of nausea. They discussed logistics. Chloe would arrive late after me to make the first impact. Brenda would arrive even later, for the second act, as she called it. They shared selfies from the dressing room when they went to pick up the dresses from a boutique across town, a place they both later claimed to have never visited. They laughed about what my face would look like. They debated whether to try to get a third person in on the joke. But the message that truly broke me, the one that made the tears finally spill over and run down my cheeks, was a message from Brenda. It was from the week before the wedding. Chloe had apparently expressed a moment of doubt, a fleeting worry that it was too mean. Brenda's response was swift and merciless. "Don't be soft, Chloe. This is necessary. We have to set the tone for this marriage. She needs to understand that she is a guest in this family, not the new queen. She needs to be put in her place from day one. When we're done, she'll look like a foolish little girl trying to sit at the grown-ups table." A foolish little girl. That's what they thought of me. All my efforts to be kind, to be respectful, to build a relationship had been met with this cold, calculating contempt. They didn't just dislike me. They despised me. They saw me as a threat to their control over Mark, a usurper to their family throne. The last message in the thread was from the morning of the wedding. It was from Chloe. "Showtime," it read, followed by a winking emoji. I closed the laptop, my body trembling with a rage so profound it felt like it was vibrating in my bones. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound. But now it was surrounded by something else. A cold, hard resolve. They had wanted to make me feel small. They had wanted to put me in my place. They had called their little plot Project Whiteout, a plan to erase me, to make me invisible on my own wedding day. They had failed. They hadn't erased me. They had ignited something within me, a fire that would not be easily extinguished. I finally had the truth. Undeniable, ugly, and written in black and white. The question now was what I was going to do with it. My mind started to work, the shock and grief giving way to a sharp, focused clarity. This was not the end of the story. It was the beginning. And I would be the one to write the final chapter. I didn't confront Mark with the chat logs right away. Seeing the words on the screen was one thing, but I knew that if I showed them to him in the heat of my anger and his confusion, it would just lead to a fight. He would feel cornered, forced to choose between his wife and his family, and he might retreat into denial as a defense mechanism. I needed more than just his anger. I needed his alliance. And to get that, I had to build a case that was so airtight, so irrefutable, that even his deep-seated instinct to keep the peace would be overwhelmed by the sheer weight of their deception. So I saved the chat logs. I took screenshots with my phone, every single message, and saved them to a secure folder. That was my foundation. Now I needed to build on it. I needed to expose the lies they had told since the wedding, the little inconsistencies that would unravel their entire story. I decided to start with a soft approach. I needed to gather information without raising their suspicions. My first call was to Aunt Carol. Aunt Carol was Mark's aunt, Brenda's younger sister. She was a kind, no-nonsense woman who had always been warm and welcoming to me. She seemed to exist on the periphery of the family drama, observing it with a weary sense of detachment. I hoped she could be a neutral source of information. I called her a few days after the wedding, under the pretense of thanking her for her lovely gift. We chatted for a few minutes about the ceremony, and then I steered the conversation carefully. "It was such a beautiful day," I said, "though we did have a bit of a fashion emergency." I laughed, trying to sound lighthearted. "I still can't believe Chloe and Brenda ended up in the same dress as me. It was so bizarre." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Yes," Carol said, her voice careful. "It was quite a coincidence." The way she said it, with a slight hesitation, told me everything I needed to know. She didn't believe it either. "Brenda said she just saw it in a magazine and fell in love with it," I continued, fishing. "Did she ever mention it to you beforehand? I'm just so curious how something like that happens." Another pause. This one was longer. "You know, Brenda was being very secretive about her outfit," Carol finally said, her voice dropping a little. "I asked her what she was wearing a few weeks ago, and she was very evasive. Just said it was a surprise. I thought it was a bit odd at the time." That was it. A small piece of corroboration. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It confirmed that Brenda's secrecy was out of character, suggesting premeditation. "Well, it certainly was a surprise," I said, forcing another laugh. "Thanks again for everything, Carol. It was so good to see you." "You too, dear," she said warmly. "And Lily, for what it's worth, you looked beautiful. You were the only one who looked like a bride." Her words were a small balm on my wounded spirit. I hung up the phone feeling a little stronger. I had a potential ally. Now for the antagonists themselves. I needed to talk to them separately, to see if their stories would hold up under the slightest bit of pressure. I decided to start with Chloe. I sent her a text a couple of days later. "Hey, hope you're having a good week. The whole dress thing was so crazy, I feel like we should get together and properly laugh about it over a coffee. You free this weekend?" I made the invitation as breezy and non-threatening as possible. I needed her to let her guard down. She agreed immediately, probably eager for another chance to play the victim of a crazy coincidence. We met at a small cafe on Saturday morning. She was all smiles and bubbly energy, launching into a dramatic retelling of the insane moment she walked into the reception. "I literally almost died," she said, clutching her chest for effect. "I saw you and I was like, you have got to be kidding me." I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. I nodded and smiled, playing my part. "It was definitely a shock," I said. "So tell me, where did you even find that dress? It's so unique. I searched for months to find something like it." "Oh, you know," she said, waving her hand vaguely. "I got it at that little boutique downtown, what's it called? Serafina's Closet or something like that. I just popped in one day and there it was. It must have been fate. I made a mental note of the name. Really? That's so funny, I said. Because I got mine online, from a small designer based in another state. This was a lie, but a necessary one. I needed to create a contradiction. Her eyes widened slightly. Oh, well, isn't that crazy? She said, recovering quickly. They must sell to a bunch of different places. Small world. I guess so, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Did you go shopping with your mom for her dress? I'm surprised she didn't see you try yours on. No, she said, shaking her head a little too quickly. Mom got her dress completely separately. She ordered hers from some catalog, I think. She's so old-fashioned. We didn't even talk about our outfits. We wanted it to be a surprise for each other. Lie after lie. Each one delivered with a confident smile. She was a practiced performer, but her story was already full of holes. She claimed they didn't discuss their outfits, yet Aunt Carol said Brenda was being intentionally secretive. She claimed she bought the dress at a local boutique, while my fake story was that it was an online, out-of-state designer. I had what I needed from her. I endured another 30 minutes of her self-aggrandizing stories before making my excuses and leaving. The next day, I put the second part of my plan into action. I called Brenda. I used the same friendly post-wedding follow-up excuse. After a few minutes of polite chatter, I brought up the dress. Brenda, I was just laughing with Chloe about the whole dress situation, I began. It was just the most unbelievable coincidence. Well, these things happen, Brenda said coolly. As I said, it's a popular style. It's funny, I continued, keeping my voice light. Chloe was telling me she bought hers at a little boutique called Seraphina's Closet. Did you happen to see it there too? There was a dead silence on the phone. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to remember what story she was supposed to be telling. No, she said finally. I don't go to boutiques. I ordered mine online. There was a website I saw advertised in a magazine, a place called Everlasting Elegance. She said the name with such authority, as if daring me to question it. Oh, okay, I said, feigning confusion. That's weird. I got mine from that same website. I'm surprised they would sell the same dress to two people in the same family for the same event. You'd think their system would flag that. Another silence, this one more charged than the last. Well, I'm sure it was just a computer glitch, she said, her voice becoming clipped and impatient. Lily, is there a point to all these questions? It was an unfortunate coincidence, and it's over now. I think we should all move on. You're right, I said, my voice sweet as honey. I'm just trying to make sense of it all. It was just so shocking. Anyway, it was lovely talking to you. I hung up the phone, a grim smile on my face. It was perfect. Chloe had said she bought it at a local boutique and that her mom bought hers from a catalog. Brenda had said she bought it from a website called Everlasting Elegance and that Chloe had done so separately. Their stories were a complete mess. They hadn't even bothered to coordinate their lies. It was a rookie mistake. Born of arrogance. They never imagined I would be smart enough or brave enough to question them. They had underestimated me, and that was going to be their downfall. I now had the chat logs, a witness to their suspicious behavior, and two conflicting alibis. My case was getting stronger, but I still felt like I was missing a crucial piece: the motive. The chat logs told me they wanted to put me in my place, but it still felt incomplete. There had to be something more, something that had pushed them to take such a huge, risky step. My investigation was far from over. I needed to dig deeper. I needed to understand the full scope of their animosity, because I had a feeling this wasn't just about me marrying Mark. This was about something much bigger. The conflicting stories from Brenda and Chloe were a solid start, but they were still just words. It was my word against theirs. I needed something more tangible, something that went beyond their lies and pointed to a deeper level of deception. I started thinking about their relationship, their history, and their motivations. The phrase from the chat log kept echoing in my mind. She needs to understand that she is a guest in this family. It wasn't just about jealousy, it was about power and control. And in their family, power and control often seemed to be linked to money. Mark's father, David, was a successful businessman. He was a kind but traditional man who had always been the primary provider. Brenda had never worked, and she managed the family's social life and household finances with an iron fist. Chloe, despite being in her late 20s, was still heavily reliant on her parents financially. She worked a part-time job at an art gallery that seemed to be more of a hobby than a career. I started to wonder if their resentment towards me was tied to the perceived threat I posed to their comfortable financial arrangement. I was financially independent, with a good career and my own savings. I didn't need their money, which meant they couldn't control me with it. This thought sent me down a new path of investigation. I remembered Mark mentioning years ago that he still had an old joint savings account with his mother. It was set up when he was in college as an emergency fund. He had told me he thought it was empty and dormant, that he just hadn't gotten around to closing it. On a hunch, I asked him if he still had the login information. "I think so," he said, digging through a folder of old paperwork. "Why? There's nothing in it. I cleared it out when I got my first real job." He found a crumpled piece of paper with a username and password and handed it to me. But I haven't looked at it in years. My heart pounded as I logged into the bank's website. The account wasn't empty. There was a balance of several $1,000s. I clicked on the transaction history. There were small deposits every month labeled Family Fund Contribution from what I recognized as his father's business account. It seemed Brenda had been using this dormant account as her personal slush fund, siphoning off money from the family business. I felt a jolt of anger on Mark's behalf. His mother was lying to him, using an account in his name for her own purposes. But it was the recent withdrawals that made my blood run cold. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the dates. And then I saw it. A withdrawal from 3 months ago. The amount was significant, nearly $2,000. The description was vague. Catering deposit, event. But it was the date that caught my eye. It was 2 days after Chloe had sent Brenda the link to the dress in the Project Whiteout chat. It couldn't be a coincidence. I dug a little deeper, looking at the boutique's website, the one Chloe had accidentally named. I found the dress. The price was listed at $650. $2,000 was almost exactly the price of 3 of those dresses, plus tax. They hadn't just planned to humiliate me. They had used money that was, in part, Mark's to do it. They had stolen from their own son and brother to fund their cruel little scheme. And they had tried to hide it under the guise of a wedding expense, knowing that in the chaos of planning, we might never notice. This was the darker discovery I had been looking for. This elevated their actions from a malicious prank to outright theft and deception. This was the kind of betrayal that even Mark, in his desire for peace, would not be able to ignore. That night, I sat him down. I didn't start with the chat logs. I started with the bank account. I laid it out for him calmly and logically. "Mark, we need to talk about the emergency account you have with your mother." He looked confused. "What about it? I told you it's empty." "It's not empty," I said gently. "And there's something you need to see." I turned the laptop around and showed him the screen. I watched his face as he processed the information. I saw the confusion morph into disbelief and then into a slow, dawning anger. He scrolled through the transactions, his jaw tightening. "She's been putting money in here from Dad's business?" he said, his voice low. "And what is this? Catering deposit?" He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "The withdrawal was made 2 days after Chloe found the dress," I said quietly. "The amount is almost exactly the cost of 3 of those dresses." He stared at the screen for a long time, the pieces clicking into place. The flimsy excuses, the conflicting stories, the sheer improbability of it all were now cemented by this cold, hard financial fact. His denial finally shattered. The image he had of his mother and sister as flawed but loving people was being dismantled before his very eyes. "They used my money," he whispered, his voice cracking with hurt. "They used our money to do that to you." Yes, I said. They did. He stood up and started pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. He was angry, angrier than I had ever seen him. It was a deep, quiet rage, born of a profound sense of betrayal. All this time, he said, his back to me, all this time I've made excuses for them. I've let them get away with so much. The little comments, the passive aggression. I always told you that's just how they are. I told you not to take it personally. He turned to face me, his eyes filled with regret. I am so sorry, Lily. I should have listened to you. I should have protected you. It's not your fault, I said, going to him. You wanted to believe the best of your family. That's a good quality. But now we know the truth. What do we do? He asked, his voice raw. Do I call them? Do I scream at them? No, I said, my own resolve solidifying. Screaming won't work. They'll just twist it, deny it, and make us out to be the bad guys. We can't fight them on their terms. We have to fight them on ours. A plan had been forming in the back of my mind, a way to not just expose them, but to dismantle the power structure that had allowed them to behave this way for so long. It was risky. It would cause a huge rift in his family. But at this point, I knew that the rift was already there. They had created it. We would just be the ones to finally expose it to the light of day. What are you thinking? He asked, searching my face. I'm thinking that your mother and sister are very concerned with appearances, I said slowly. They care about what the rest of the family thinks. They care about their status. And they have built their entire lives on the foundation of your father's trust and generosity. He nodded, following my train of thought. So we don't confront them privately, where they can lie and manipulate, I continued. We create a situation where they have no choice but to face the truth, in front of the one person whose opinion they can't afford to lose. My dad, he whispered. Exactly, I said. We need to do this publicly. We need to present the evidence in a way that is so clear, so undeniable, that there is no room for them to wriggle out of it. We need to take away their power. And the source of their power is the family's perception of them as respectable, loving people. He was quiet for a moment, the weight of what I was proposing settling on him. This wasn't just about getting an apology. This was about fundamentally changing the dynamics of his family forever. Okay, he said finally, his voice firm. Okay, Lily, I'm with you. Whatever you want to do, I'm with you 100%. That was the moment everything shifted. I was no longer fighting this battle alone. I had my husband by my side. And now, I had the one thing I hadn't shown him yet. The final, devastating piece of evidence. There's one more thing you need to see, I said, picking up my phone. I opened the folder of screenshots and handed it to him. It was called Project Whiteout. He took the phone and began to read. I watched as the last remnants of his doubt were erased, replaced by a look of profound sadness and steely determination. He read every message, his expression growing harder with each word. When he got to the part where his mother called me a foolish little girl, he flinched as if he'd been physically struck. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I'm going to make this right, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I promise you, they are not going to get away with this. We had the financial records. We had the chat logs. We had Mark's unwavering support. But I knew that to truly succeed, to ensure that Brenda and Chloe couldn't spin this as me and Mark ganging up on them, we needed one more thing. We needed an impartial witness. We needed someone from inside the family, someone respected and trusted to corroborate our story. My thoughts immediately went to Aunt Carol. Her hesitation on the phone, her comment about Brenda's secrecy, it all suggested she knew more than she was letting on. She was the key. If she would stand with us, Brenda and Chloe's defense would crumble completely. I called her the next day and asked if we could meet for coffee. I told her it was important and that I needed her advice on a delicate family matter. She agreed, her voice full of a cautious curiosity. We met at the same cafe where I had met Chloe, a place that now felt tainted with lies. This time, however, I was armed with the truth. I didn't start with the accusations. I started with my own vulnerability. Carol, I began, my voice quiet. I'm struggling. The wedding was difficult. What happened with the dresses has really shaken me. Mark and I both feel that it wasn't a coincidence, and the excuses we've been given don't add up. She listened patiently, her eyes kind and perceptive. She didn't interrupt. She just let me speak. I know this is a difficult position to put you in, I continued. But you mentioned on the phone that Brenda was being secretive about her dress. It made me wonder, did you know anything about this beforehand? Carol sighed, a long, weary sound. She looked down at her coffee cup, then back up at me. Lily, I like you a great deal, she said. And I love my nephew. I've seen how happy you make him. I've also watched my sister and my niece operate for a very long time. She took a deep breath. Brenda did more than just act secretive. She tried to get me involved. My heart leaped. This was it. The breakthrough. What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. About a month before the wedding, Carol explained. She called me. She was giddy, excited. She told me she and Chloe had a hilarious idea for a family photo at the reception. She told me they had found a dress that was very similar to what they imagined my style would be, and she wanted me to get one too. She said we could all surprise you and take a funny triplets picture. The audacity of it was stunning. They had wanted to expand their army. What did you say? I whispered. I told her absolutely not, Carol said, her voice firm. I told her it wasn't funny. I told her it was a cruel, childish thing to do to a bride on her wedding day. I said it would humiliate you and ruin the reception. I told her if she went through with it, I wanted no part of it. What did she say to that? She got angry, Carol admitted. She told me I had no sense of humor. She said I was being overly sensitive, just like she expected you to be. Then she made me promise not to say anything to you or Mark. She said she didn't want to spoil the surprise. I felt guilty about keeping quiet ever since. When I saw them at the reception, my heart just sank. Relief washed over me, so potent it was almost dizzying. We had a witness, a credible, respected family member who could attest to their malicious intent. Carol, I said, leaning forward. It's worse than you think. It wasn't just a cruel idea. They meticulously planned it for months, and they used Mark's money to do it. I explained everything. The chat logs, the code name Project Whiteout, the hidden bank account, the fraudulent catering deposit. I didn't show her the proof yet. I just laid out the facts. As I spoke, her expression shifted from weary resignation to shock, and then to a quiet, simmering anger. She stole from her own son? Carol said, her voice barely a whisper. To pull a stunt like that? David would be horrified. That's why I'm here, I said. Mark and I have decided we can't let this go. We can't live with this level of deception. We are going to confront them. But we want to do it at your brother-in-law David's upcoming birthday party. We want to do it in front of the family, so they can't lie their way out of it. I looked her directly in the eye. And we need your help. We need you to tell David what you just told me. Would you be willing to do that? She was hesitant. I could see the conflict in her eyes. She was a private person who hated conflict. Lily, that would cause a war, she said softly. It would tear the family apart. The family is already torn apart, I countered gently. The rot is just hidden beneath the surface. Brenda and Chloe's behavior, their cruelty and their deception, if that's what's holding this family together, then it deserves to fall apart. All we would be doing is letting in the light. I could see she was wavering. I knew I had to give her space. This was a huge thing to ask of someone. You don't have to decide right now, I said, pulling back. But please think about it. Think about what's right. Think about the kind of family you want to be a part of. We finished our coffee, and I left her with that thought. The next 2 days were agonizing. I didn't know if she would agree. Without her, our plan was much weaker. It would be our word and our evidence against Brenda and Chloe's inevitable denials. But with Carol on our side, their lies would have nowhere to hide. The day before I had planned to follow up with her, she called me. "Lily," she said, her voice clear and resolved. "I've thought about it, and you're right. What Brenda and Chloe did was not just mean, it was wrong on a fundamental level. The financial deception. That crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. I'll support you. I'll tell David everything I know." I closed my eyes, a silent wave of gratitude washing over me. The final piece was in place. We had the chat logs. We had the financial records. And now we had our witness. The trap was set. All we had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to spring it. David's 60th birthday party was in 1 week. 1 week until Project Whiteout would be exposed for the ugly, pathetic scheme it truly was. 1 week until Brenda and Chloe would finally have to face the consequences of their actions. The week leading up to David's party was the longest of my life. Mark and I were a team, united in our purpose. We went over the plan again and again. We knew we had to be calm, factual, and unwavering. Any display of excessive emotion would be used against us, twisted by Brenda and Chloe to make us look unhinged and vindictive. Our power lay in the cold, hard evidence. David's party was being held at a private room in an upscale restaurant. The entire extended family would be there. It was the perfect stage. Public enough to have witnesses, but private enough to prevent a full-blown scene in front of strangers. As Mark and I got dressed that evening, a strange calm settled over me. The nervousness was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. I chose a simple, elegant black dress. I wanted to be a backdrop, to let the evidence speak for itself. We arrived at the restaurant and were greeted by a flurry of activity. The room was buzzing with conversation and laughter. I saw Brenda and Chloe holding court in a corner, looking perfectly coiffed and confident. They greeted us with bright, false smiles. "Lily, you look lovely," Brenda said, her eyes scanning my simple dress with a hint of condescension. "So much more. Appropriate for your figure." I just smiled back. "Thank you, Brenda. You look nice too." There was no point in engaging in her petty games tonight. The final game was about to begin, and she didn't even know she was a player. We mingled for a while, making small talk with cousins and uncles. I found Aunt Carol, who gave me a subtle, reassuring nod from across the room. Mark stayed close to me, a silent, supportive presence. After the main course, David stood up to thank everyone for coming. He was a good man, a bit old-fashioned, but fair and decent. He valued honesty and integrity above all else. Brenda and Chloe's entire strategy depended on him never seeing their true natures. After his speech, as people began to applaud, Mark raised his glass. "If I could just say a few words as well," he said, his voice clear and steady, cutting through the chatter. The room quieted down and all eyes turned to him. Brenda was beaming, expecting a heartfelt tribute to his father. "I want to thank everyone for being here to celebrate my dad," Mark began. "He's a man who taught me the value of hard work, honesty, and family. And it's in the spirit of that honesty that I have something I need to address." Brenda's smile faltered slightly. Chloe looked confused. "As many of you know, Lily and I got married a few weeks ago," Mark continued, his voice unwavering. "And while it was a beautiful day, it was also marred by an incident that we have been struggling with, an incident of profound disrespect and deception." A tense silence fell over the room. Brenda shot a venomous glare at me, as if I had put him up to this. In a way, I had, but this was his decision as much as mine. "Mom, Chloe," Mark said, turning to face them directly. "Lily and I have a question about a wedding gift. It seems we received a rather expensive one that we weren't aware of, a catering deposit that was withdrawn from a joint account I share with my mother. An account I was told was dormant." Brenda's face went pale. Chloe looked utterly bewildered, clearly not in on this part of the deception. Mark, I have no idea what you're talking about, Brenda said, her voice tight. This is hardly the time or the place for this. I think it's the perfect time and place, I said, stepping forward to stand beside Mark. My voice is calm, but it carries across the room. I am in the present now. This moment is sharp and real. The withdrawal was for $1,950, Brenda. It was made 3 months ago. Funnily enough, that's almost the exact price of 3 very specific dresses from a boutique in town. Chloe gasps, finally understanding where this is going. This is insane, she sputters, looking from me to her mother. You're making this up. You're trying to ruin Dad's birthday. Am I? I ask, pulling out my phone. The restaurant has a large television screen on the wall that the family was using for a photo slideshow. With a few taps, I connect my phone to the screen. The slideshow disappears, replaced by the first screenshot of the chat log. The title, Project Whiteout, is displayed in large, clear letters for everyone to see. A collective gasp goes through the room. Brenda looks at the screen, and for the first time, I see genuine panic in her eyes. That's fake, she says, her voice rising. You fabricated that. This is slander. Is it? Mark says, his voice like ice. He gestures for me to scroll. I do. Message after message appears on the screen. The link to the dress, the plan for their separate entrances, the discussion of how I would look foolish. The entire sordid plan is laid bare for the whole family to witness. David, who has been watching this unfold with a thunderous expression, finally speaks. He turns to his wife, his voice dangerously low. Brenda, is this true? No, of course not, David. She cries, trying to rally. She's a manipulative little liar. She's trying to turn this family against me. This is the moment. The final, crucial piece of the puzzle. I look across the room at Aunt Carol. She meets my gaze, takes a deep breath, and stands up. It's true, David, Carol says, her voice filled with a sad certainty. The room is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Brenda called me a month before the wedding. She asked me to be a part of it. She wanted me to buy the dress too, to make it a funny family photo. I told her it was a cruel thing to do. I told her she would humiliate Lily. She didn't listen. The betrayal on David's face is devastating. His wife's lie, so baldly stated, has been completely dismantled by his own sister-in-law. Brenda looks at Carol, her eyes wide with shock and fury. She has been betrayed by one of her own. Chloe has started to cry, not out of remorse, but out of the sheer terror of being caught. The power has shifted. The public humiliation they so carefully crafted for me has been turned back on them, magnified 100 times over. They are exposed, their cruelty and their lies laid bare for the entire family to see. There is nowhere left for them to hide. Brenda opens her mouth to speak, but no words come out. For the first time in her life, she is utterly, completely powerless. The room is silent, waiting for the verdict from the only judge that matters in their world. David looks at his wife and daughter, his expression not angry, but deeply, profoundly disappointed. The foundation of their family has just cracked wide open. The immediate aftermath was chaos contained within a suffocating silence. David stared at Brenda and Chloe, his face a mask of stone. No one else in the room dared to speak. The chat logs were still displayed on the television screen, a digital monument to their cruelty. Finally, David turned to his son. Mark, Lily, is there anything else? He asked, his voice strained. Mark shook his head. No, Dad. That's everything. David nodded slowly. He then turned his gaze back to his wife and daughter. The two of you, get your things. We will discuss this at home. The command was delivered in a low, cold tone that left no room for argument. It was not a request. Brenda, for once, seemed to understand that her usual tactics of deflection and emotional manipulation would be useless. She looked utterly defeated. She and a sobbing Chloe gathered their purses and coats and walked out of the room without another word. the eyes of 30 family members following them in stunned silence. As soon as the door closed behind them, the room erupted in a low murmur of conversation. Several relatives came up to me and Mark, offering quiet words of support, their faces a mixture of shock and sympathy. The party was effectively over. The celebratory atmosphere had been replaced by a somber, awkward tension. David walked over to us. His shoulders slumped. He looked older than he had just an hour before. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice heavy with shame. "I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I had no idea. I cannot imagine how you must have felt, Lily. To be treated that way by my family, there is no excuse." "Thank you, David," I said softly. "That means a lot." "This will be dealt with," he said, his jaw tight with resolve. "I promise you both. This level of deception, and the money, it will not be tolerated." He then walked over to his sister-in-law. He put a hand on Carol's shoulder and spoke to her quietly. I saw her nod, and he gave her a grateful look before addressing the rest of the room, announcing that the party was over and thanking everyone for coming. The drive home with Mark was quiet, but it was a comfortable silence. The tension that had been hanging over us for weeks was finally gone. Mark reached over and took my hand. "You were incredible," he said. "You were so strong." "We were strong," I corrected him. "We did this together." He squeezed my hand, and I knew in that moment that we had weathered the first great storm of our marriage and had come out stronger on the other side. The fallout over the next few days was significant. David was true to his word. He called Mark the next day to inform him of the immediate consequences. Brenda had been removed from all of David's business accounts, and her personal credit cards, which were tied to his name, had been canceled. She was, for the first time in her adult life, without access to the family fortune she had so freely used. David had given her a strict, limited budget and told her that her access to anything more was contingent on her seeking therapy for her manipulative behavior. Chloe was given an ultimatum. She had to pay Mark and me back for the cost of the 3 dresses immediately. She was also told that her financial support from her parents was being cut off. She had 6 months to find a full-time job that could support her lifestyle, or she would have to move into a smaller apartment and sell her car. The days of her hobby job and lavish shopping sprees were over. A few days later, Aunt Carol called me. "I hope you two are doing okay," she said, her voice warm. "We're doing much better," I told her honestly. "Thank you so much for your help, Carol. I know that wasn't easy for you." "It was the right thing to do," she said simply. "Family shouldn't be a weapon you use to hurt people. David is heartbroken, but I think he's also relieved in a strange way. He's been seeing the signs of Brenda's behavior for years, but he never had anything concrete to act on. You gave him that. You gave him the truth." We saw Brenda and Chloe a month later at a small family brunch for a cousin's birthday. Their transformation was startling. They were quiet, subdued. They looked smaller somehow. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by a nervous, uncertain energy. They were no longer the center of the family's orbit. They were outsiders, relegated to the fringes. Most of the family was polite but distant with them. The story of what they had done had spread, and they had lost the one thing they valued most: their social standing. At one point, Brenda approached me near the buffet table. She looked tired. "Lily," she said, her voice barely audible. I want to apologize." I waited, saying nothing. "What we did was inappropriate," she stammered, unable to meet my eyes. "It was a joke that went too far." A joke. Even now, she couldn't bring herself to admit the true malice behind her actions. The apology was weak, self-serving, and utterly meaningless. "An apology doesn't erase the intent, Brenda," I said calmly. "You didn't want to share a laugh with me. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to make me feel worthless on my wedding day. You wanted to put me in my place." I paused, letting the words hang in the air between us. "And now, it seems you've finally found yours." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone with her plate of food. I felt no triumph, no glee, just a quiet, settled sense of justice. Later, Chloe tried to offer a similar, tearful apology, which I met with the same cool dismissal. Their words were empty. Their remorse was not for the pain they had caused me, but for the consequences they were now facing. My life is different now. Mark and I are stronger than ever. He has learned to set firm boundaries with his family, and he puts our marriage first. Always. My relationship with his father is surprisingly warm. He respects me, and we have bonded over a shared desire for honesty and peace. Aunt Carol has become a true friend and confidant. The rest of the family treats me with a newfound respect, not just as Mark's wife, but as a woman who will not be silenced or pushed around. I no longer waste my energy trying to win the approval of Brenda and Chloe. I am civil for the sake of family peace, but I am not warm. I do not pretend. I have learned that you cannot build a healthy relationship on a foundation of lies and fear. They wanted to teach me a lesson about my place in their family, but in the end, they were the ones who were schooled. They wanted to make me feel small, to wipe me out of my own life. Instead, they only succeeded in shrinking their own worlds down to the size of their petty cruelty. I stopped waiting for them to change. I stopped giving them chances to hurt me. I took my power back, and they finally learned what it feels like to be invisible.